fires. What sense does that make? Just stop feeding the dragon. Just stop. And you don't have to keep lighting the fire. To say there's some sense in conceding sloppiness and intrinsic imperfection, which is another word for brokenness. To say the solution is...
Oh, hell no. Well,
just keep doing it.
yeah, listen. So it's an Inmendem video, yeah. Just watching an Inmendem video. And I don't really have too much to add other than, just ponder that last sentence about what is it, imperfection and brokenness. So basically that's saying that unbrokenness or completeness is perfection. And that's an interesting, thought to let run through your mind, and I'll just kind of leave it there. Because, you could nitpick about that, but for the most part, yeah, stuff that's like imperfect, right? It has flaws. And so you're focusing on the flaws when you say that's what takes it from the perfect state or the whole complete state, to an imperfect state. And isn't that a lot like the value equation and the suffering, that how we perceive the suffering, how the suffering is in actuality in terms of a value unit, quanta, reference point, quantification, enumeration, valuation, whatever. Suffering as a unit, right? As a unit, assigning it a value. And suffering is not, it doesn't, obviously what you would put suffering onto the negative scale in terms of experiences and whatever, whatnot, all that shit. And when it comes to suffering, it's usually the result of a deprivation. And a deprivation means that it's a detraction from a neutral state. Meaning, had you, absent the deprivation, you would be not better off. You would be better off relative to the point of the deprivation and the extent of the deprivation. The extent to which that deprivation deprives you, the intensity of the deprivation. But anyway, as I was saying, it addresses the viewpoint, the claim, the observation that we're kind of, there's no such thing as, I guess, some sort of positive realm. In other words, a neutral state is the best state you can achieve. And I would argue that very few people are experiencing that state at the present moment. Society doesn't allow us to feel in a whole state, perfect state, non-broken state. We are always in a broken state in terms of needing something. And that is just, that's the cold hard truth. And so the conclusion is very simple. Why create organisms who do this need thing, this want, this desire, this, it's basically tallied up to, human beings experiencing deprivation, wishing for it to be gone, and they'll go to extreme lengths to do that. I think people can think of their own examples, but it should be fairly obvious. Okay, seems like the rest of the video is loaded, so let's go ahead and swing it over to Gary.
I mean, there's just no, it's just so, that is intrinsically stupid. It's intrinsically deserving of the Einstein quote. This is the definition of imbecile. It just seems all so tragic that even when people have some sort of knowledge of the world, some sort of information, that they still can't add 2 plus 2. They still fail on the fundamental math, the most important equation. They're doing all the abstract crap, and they're just getting the simplest things wrong. Einstein might be a good example. Did all the eccentric, weird kind of stuff, but he wasn't too good at just being a human being, apparently. How can I even judge? I don't want to be judging. But yeah, apparently he didn't have very good personal habits.
Yeah.
Very disappointing. I don't portray any kind of grace in how I live my personal life. But it's my my slobbery does have boundaries. I suppose it's not a very good metaphor, but it doesn't really matter. I don't need a metaphor to argue that the biggest, simplest questions are getting perverted into complexity, and just so they can get the answers wrong. It's just not smart. Oh, here a dog's coming to bark and bite. Hey, pup. Hi, pup. Hi.
All right. Well, look, I think not you, but people poison the well when they talk about, the subject / objective, quote unquote, stuff, because the relativism stuff. Because the minute you start saying, well, it's not what that person wants, just because it's not what that person somehow far away in some other context, culturally, religiously, etc., just because it's not what they want at the moment doesn't make the argument not sound. Yeah, there's nothing incorrect about it other than the fact that people will say, well, people are not going to adopt that viewpoint in this other culture or whatever, so therefore your view, because it's not universally applicable, it's just one of the many philosophies out there. And I really couldn't disagree more with that outlook, that rationale, that justification, because suffering is objectively bad, and other people may say, well, other people may not think it's objectively bad, but I think that's one of the premises that you have to adopt. And if I haven't really heard a substantial reason why suffering is somehow not intrinsically bad, as I've just been talking about in terms of the deprivation. right? I don't think who's going to argue that deprivations somehow, well, they're somehow not negative. I don't think people would claim that. Um, people could claim that the satisfaction of the deprivation ends up resulting in a positive, but I would interrogate that further and ask that person the question. Um, you know, describe that positive. What is that specifically? Is that logical? How can you logically describe what a positive feeling is like, and if the positive feeling were achievable, what would, not only what would that positive feeling feel like, but wouldn't we then necessarily want to strive for that? And how could people go about striving to achieve a positive, other than deluding themselves into thinking that they're experiencing life in some sort of positive, as opposed to, that which would be the inverse of having deprivations. So actually, rather than having deprivations, you would somehow be negatively deprived. In other words, you'd be like, this positive experience that I cannot describe. And that's not for lack of trying either. So, this whole relativism stuff, it really gets in the way, just in terms of these kind of people who are culty or who are fucking ignorant and living under a rock, and aren't using logic, think that the voodoo man is in control, and that down is really up, and that up is really down, and that suffering is really not suffering, and happiness is actually bad or something, or like, mirth or some kind of, that's a possible way of describing like a so-called positive experience, I suppose. So that you're going to tell me that culture's viewpoint about what suffering is, and it actually laughing is crying, and it's really bad. You're going to tell me that you're going to give that viewpoint just as much weight and then you're going to say it's universally, and that my viewpoint is somehow now universally inapplicable because of the stupid ass people who believe that garbage? I don't think so. I say, what, in terms of the logic, we gotta agree on the suffering, and I think this is what has been tripping everybody up. Alright, we need to have a dialogue about suffering, and is it intrinsically bad? And going back, there's the drunk driving example, but that's more about procreation, but pure suffering, we're talking about the tree falling on the cat example that I always go back to. And then from there, you can go to the drunk driving example, the whole why create a need that doesn't need to exist. You talk about the risk with, like, life being a meat grinder that you're willingly imposing upon another generation. And the drunk driving analogy, the roller coaster analogy. Alright, if the roller coaster, threw a kid off every 500 times, would you still want your kid? Would you still urge your kid to go on? You'd still take that risk, or you yourself would go on the roller coaster, and somehow there's like a certain amount of risk that's acceptable. that you can impose on another person. So maybe getting on the roller coaster yourself isn't the best, but like actually having your kid get on this roller coaster and subjecting a kid to that 1 in 500 chance. Is that 1 in 500 chance worth it? Should you be imposing that decision on the kid? Because it's not his free will, is it? You know, you're doing the commanding. So that's that whole analogy. Like I said, the drunk driving analogy. You know, that's like fairly solid, I suppose. As far as the analogies go, the imposition of risk, that being a whole separate ethical issue in and of itself, the imposition of risk. But I think we need to more or less have a dialogue about the suffering first, because if you say that somehow suffering doesn't happen or suffering is good or all that bullshit, then you can't have a dialogue any further, because that's one of the premises, like I already stated. And so when it's not about the premises anymore, then you can't go any further. You can't talk about the risk, because if there's no suffering, then there's no risk, right? So the logic breaks down from there. But you have to accept that suffering is intrinsically bad. You know, and if you don't believe that, let's have a dialogue about it, etc., etc. So most people would believe that it is suffering. That suffering is bad, right? And creating a separate consciousness that's capable of experiencing suffering. Well, why would you do that? And suffering meaning experiencing deprivation. I'm using that interchangeably. But, you know, why would you, so that's where you get the basis of the imposition argument, is basically just the why create the need type thing. Why create the independent consciousness, and why create the needing being more specifically. So that's basically a few, those are the two key tenets of antinatalism, and it can only be accomplished through I think converting somebody to atheism, right? Because Christians aren't going to buy this shit. They're not going to they're going to be like, wow, you're wacko, God is going to come down real soon and like scoop me up, and we're going to chill and like, we're going to eat like cheese and crackers in heaven at like a swingers party, right? It's going to be off the chains, chisane. But it's really not going to be like that, right? And their minds are just brainwashed to hell with this religious bullshit. So prerequisite of the antinatalism, as I've always said, is the atheism, but not the fake atheism, because that's what most people gravitate towards, in terms of in terms of a rationalization of their presence, their continued living, all of that shit. They talk about, they view the satisfaction of the deprivation as just somehow an acceptable outcome, and that's how they exist, and they try to delude themselves into thinking that they're somehow about the DNA, and a lot of people worship the DNA as the God, and some people view like the humanity somehow getting to this transcendental state, where all of our desires are somehow satisfied. I don't see the real reason for that, especially given the suffering of the third world. That's a very first worldian view, and that kind of view is espoused by somebody who has food and shelter and satisfied most of the deprivations already, so that's a very privileged philosophy to begin with. This whole view that, if we just keep chugging along, somehow we'll get to this pinnacle of progress where we can uplift everybody. And I'm saying, so you're going to uplift. Eventually, the bodies are going to be piled to the sky, and we're going to finally, dance in the sky, but we're dancing on top of all the suffering and death. So, I say just cut the experiment. This is a bad movie we're in. We just take the little clicky thing and we're like, cut. This is not gonna work right now. All right, cut. Stop the film. Don't rewind. Don't fast forward. Eject, and throw it into the fucking fire. Because this movie, it's not worth anybody watching, going through, experiencing. It's quite unfortunate. We've had our jollies making it. It's been titillating for many, for some, for a growing minority. But ultimately, it is riddled with fail, with disgusting puke, under its surface. And it's for that reason. Because that thing is just gonna stink up everything. You gotta just dispose of it in the fire or some sort of drown it in acid. This metaphorical roll of film that is our existence. That bad movie that we've been recording thus far. And so we've talked about the conversion. We've talked about the holdouts, I guess. No, we haven't talked about the holdouts, but let's just keep on going with the video.
Okay, yes it is. Oh. Yes, happy dog. Yeah, did you have a good walk? Huh? Have a good walk? Yes, you did. Alright. Enough of that socialization crap. Yeah, so I think I'm done. It's gonna be crunchy going up the hill anyway. I'm tired. Shades at work. Make me a little nauseous.
Vloggerdome.
Anyway, until next time.
Shout outs to Vloggerdome. So yeah, big shout out to Vloggerdome. It's a great atmosphere. I enjoy the videos that are on Vloggerdome. Well, most of them. Let's continue to elevate the level of conversation above this whole. Okay, so to briefly, some may categorize these discussion participants in YouTube and other forums. We've got our our professorial types, most recently Noel Plum 99. Okay, most recently he's trying. Okay, and then you have that utter fraud of a hack, so-called professor or whatever he says he is, Hannibal the Cannibal Barca. You got who else? Conference Report is another professor, right? And he is talking a lot of jibber jabber, But then again, he's making some like quite off the wall and unique videos that, you know, are just like, wow, this is some crazy stuff, dude. So in that regard, I gotta, you know, he's not quite as bad as the other few that I mentioned, so I hate to lump him in with this, but we're just talking about the professor types who are arguing with Gary on the internet. So conference report, right? You know, who else? Corey Anton, right? He's like some sort of professor of gobbledygook at the, you know, so he spits like the gobbledygook on a consistent basis about this and that, but not really, you know, academic circle jerking, right? And it's like utter incomprehensible, utterly useless crap. Like, okay, so you made your point. So how does that contribute to life on this planet? How am I going to see existence in a different way? What's meaningful about what you just said? And I struggle, you know, to come up with any reason, you know, any possible reason as to why, you know, the videos I watch with Professor Anton are contributing somehow to my overall outlook on the world. I'm going to see stuff differently somehow. It doesn't work. It's not stimulating or doing. It's not very thought provoking. Okay, so there's that gang. And then we got like the trolley types, like your Great Texas, and oh, maybe you would throw in the Anna Cantavad with the professor. I'm not sure what he does. Okay, but then anyway, you got the trolley types, like the Great Texas, the Rose Bushies, the Bark Lords, the to be Sneerius, right? Oh, Gary, you did this, you did that, Gary, you're so mean, Gary. I can't believe you did that, Gary. You made me suffer trauma. You made me suffer so much trauma. That's basically to be serious. And then so the others I won't even mention. You know, I'll just lump in your Stizor, right? In there. Let's see, who else? Yeah, Rose Bushy, Barklord, Greytex. Those are the big retards on the internet. So that's what's up. Oh, you know, but I'm just talking about the people who actually make videos, right? And then you have the people who disagree about Gary on the economic stuff, and that's basically just the modern mystic, right? And I don't have anything against the modern mystic, really. So I got nothing to say about that guy. But you know, let's see what else. Got the Stickam going on tonight. Yeah. Let's see who else uploads videos. I guess, you know, I guess I'll make another video at some point detailing like who's with Gary. So Edible Napalm, Jay Sounder, and I'm just scrolling down here. You know, oh, you know, John Paul Dorn is another troll, right? John Paul Dorn. And oh wow. Okay, so enough of a video. And fuck you very much and such.